But today we're actually going to be joined by four experts on Mars and space exploration from Georgia Tech, and we're doing a panel event. So we'll start off with some introductions by the panelists and talk a little bit about Mars, and then take questions that everyone has. So we could just kind of chat about the landing yesterday and what we're looking forward to for the mission. So thanks everybody for joining us again. So we're extremely fortunate to be joined by our panelists. So Angela Dappermont is a PhD student in EAS who studies, among other things, Martian mud volcanoes. Hopefully you saw the video about her research earlier this week. She is also working with Dr. James Wray, who is a Mars scientist extraordinaire, has been involved in a number of missions, including those by NASA and ESA. And so his work is focused a lot on the spectral signatures that characterize the surface of Mars. We also have one of our newest professors at Georgia Tech, Dr. Francis Rivera-Hernandez, who is also a Martian expert, and he studies sedimentary processes as well as the history of kind of lake cover, ice cover in lakes in hopefully Mars, but definitely also in Antarctica. And finally, Dr. Glenn Lightsey, who is a professor in the aerospace department, who's an expert in everything that involves getting a spacecraft to the launch pad and off the launch pad on its way to its destination. So thank you guys so much for joining us. Maybe we can go around and do just some introductions. Angela, would you like to kick it off?
Hi, I'm Angela Dapremont. As Brittany said, I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech in EAS. I'm also a visiting researcher at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland, and I'm really interested in the mineralogy of Mars, pretty much anything that I can investigate the composition of. But my dissertation work is focused on mud volcanoes on Mars.
Alrighty, James?
Yes, so as Brittany said, and I guess the materials advertising today said that I'm a co-investigator on the HiRISE and CRISM instruments, which are two instruments on NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. CRISM does infrared spectroscopy, like Angela was talking about, and HiRISE takes the highest resolution images we have of the surface of Mars from space. And interested generally in using those two tools, among others, to determine the environmental history of different places on Mars. So yeah, I think that's the basics anyway.
Awesome. Francis.
Hi, everybody. As Brittany said, I'm Francis Rivera-Hernandez, and I'm indeed a new faculty member at Georgia Tech. Just started in January and excited to be in Atlanta now. I'm a planetary geologist, which just means that I enjoy studying the geology of multiple planets, mostly Mars, from using rover data. And so I'm a collaborating scientist on the Curiosity rover mission as part of the MAHLI and CAMCAM instruments, which are very similar to two of the instruments on Perseverance. And so I'm super excited that Perseverance is going to be using these instruments and exploring lake environments. As Brittany mentioned, I also enjoy studying lake environments, and particularly in icy places. And so excited to be here and happy to answer questions.
And Glenn.
Hi, I'm Glenn Lightsey, and I am a spacecraft technologist and spacecraft engineer, so I'm the non-planetary scientist in the group. But basically, I really enjoy designing and building and understanding how spacecraft work. And the Mars Perseverance mission is a super cool mission with a lot of really interesting technologies and new elements to it. So it's been really fun to watch, and I'm happy to be here to provide support and answer questions.
Well, I thought we might kick it off just with impressions of yesterday. What were you most excited about? What do you think was a big success from yesterday, or your favorite moment? Anyone like to take that on?
I guess I'll start. I'm always amazed at, when everything works. You have to string together so many things, and just the amount of people involved and the amount of effort it takes, and you get, this designing work starts 5 years in advance, and then it all just goes like clockwork, which doesn't always happen, by the way. But I mean, it's really amazing when it works. So to me, every time I see this, it kind of takes my breath away, just watching it happen. And it really is, it's a triumph, I think, of our technology and our ways of doing things. So very excited about it.
I guess I can go next.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, you can go, James. It's okay.
Well, I was going to kind of second what Glenn said anyway, which is I remember for Curiosity's landing 8.5 years ago, feeling like the whole sky crane system, which was brand new then, just seemed so fantastical that I did really feel amazed that it all worked so well. And I think, once you see it work once, there's the temptation to feel that it'll work every time, which of course is not true even in itself. But then yesterday there were additional new wrinkles, such as the fact that to land at this site, we needed terrain relative navigation, where the rover would, in the span of seconds, take photos of the surface, compare to a map that was programmed into it, figure out where it was. And so I think the coolest moment for me in watching the coverage was when they said something like, the rover has found a terrain solution, but basically that process had worked. That really made me say, wow. And maybe I'll just briefly share on my screen. I saw this map on social media, so I can't speak for the original source or the veracity of it, but this is apparently a map of the hazards versus safe places to land, and the reds are places that would have been bad to land, whereas the blues are okay, and then the green dot is where the rover ultimately touched down. So to the extent that this is accurate, there's a lot of red on that map, and just kind of amazing and impressive that the system worked so well in its first application in a planetary environment to find the blue spot and get down safely.
I heard it was about 1.7 kilometers from its original land location. So both really, really close, but also probably adjusted itself to a better place given its capabilities, which is pretty neat.
I think that really says a lot about the way things are going to be done in the future. The ability to have autonomy in the mission, you can really see the benefits of it, especially on these interplanetary missions. Being able to react to events as they occur, without having to handle the light time delay, which is huge for these missions. It just gives you so much more capability. So I feel like there's no turning back now,
Yeah, Angela, what was... Oh, go ahead, Francis. Yeah.
I was going to say, it was real quick, and Angela can talk, since I talked a lot yesterday. I was just going to, it's amazing that we knew almost immediately where the rover landed. Like James was suggesting that, for Curiosity, that took a long time to actually figure out where the rover landed, and also even getting images back so quickly. To me, the whole thing was very surprising, and it was very satisfying to get everything very quickly. But I want Angela to talk, so take it away, Angela.
So for me, when I was watching it live, it was I got surprisingly emotional. And I guess it goes back to what Glenn was talking about in terms of just what a feat it is. It's easy to forget about that, because I was thinking the other day, I came into planetary science right after Curiosity landed. So to me, it's like landing rovers on Mars is super easy. It's something simple for NASA to do, and it's easy to kind of forget about the fact how hard it is and how unique it is, really.
Yeah, I think I go back and forth, right? Where it's like, oh, it's something we've done a million times, but it's different every single time, right? that with any exploration technology, it's totally true. Every mission's a new thing. Every time it's a new thing. No, that was really exciting. I also was really stoked about the terrain relative navigation and how that worked, and looking forward to I'm sure the many papers that are going to come out on how it worked and how to do the next step. So pretty exciting. Yeah, so I guess, does anyone have the image up? Maybe we could talk about the image or images really quick, or I can try to bring it up as well. From yesterday.
They would be at that link that Jen just shared in the chat, actually.
Ah. Yeah, there we go. So I can try to grab that. But just for those who might not have known from yesterday, when do we expect to see new images? I know, Francis, we were chatting about this right before we went live.
In a couple hours. I think there's a press conference either at 1 or 2 p.m. I forget the exact time, but in a couple hours, I'm sure they'll release some images from the descent. There were cameras everywhere, the spacecraft, while it was descending through the atmosphere, and also not only taking images, but also taking video. And so I'm pretty sure in a couple hours, we'll be able to actually get some of those action shots. And then I'm pretty sure for the videos, it might take several days. And so we'll probably get to see some of the videos next week. But definitely in a couple hours, we'll probably get some more data, at least from like I said, from the descent, and probably more from the HAZ cameras, which were the ones that we got yesterday. Since technically those are, they're able to collect data in color, not in black and white. The reason these images were in black and white was because they had a filter on to protect the camera during landing. And so, yeah, soon. It's really unfortunate we don't get to see them for the panel.
I can add that the HiRISE camera on Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter traditionally tries to take a photo, well, first of all, as soon as possible after landing to see the spacecraft on the surface, but also we usually attempt to take an image while the EDL process is happening so that you can, like the parachute descending through the atmosphere is actually large enough for the camera to resolve in theory. And we've had some success taking those photos during EDL in the past. So there was an attempt to do that yesterday. I've seen the image. I'm not allowed to share the results of it, but that will also be covered at the press conference today. So look forward to that.
You know, does anyone know? I'm sorry, I don't know the timing of that.
I had heard 10 a.m. from somebody in Arizona, so I'm guessing maybe that's 10 a.m. JPL time, so 1 p.m. like Francis said. I couldn't find it online though either. It was just
of course, right? Are you guys seeing the image that I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I just didn't know this is one of the images. Unfortunately, when I'm in the background or when I'm running the show, I can't quite see what my screen is sharing. But this is one of the landing images that we were talking about from yesterday. So as James mentioned, that you can kind of see, it obviously looks a little hazy. There's probably dust here on the cover doing its job, of course. But I wanted to get folks' initial reactions because I'm sure that all of us have been staring at this image for the last few hours.
Sure. I share a lot of images like this for curiosity, in particular during planning, since we use images like this to select targets. And so I'm used to seeing black and white blurry images. And the first thing that I noticed was a lot of diversity in what we're seeing in this image. Maybe not for people, again, who don't think about geology on Mars, but, you know, I see a lot of individual pebbles that have different shapes, and that might tell us something about their transport mechanism. There's a lot of things, yeah, like exactly where you're pointing. There's other features that look like it actually might be bedrock or even float that was indurated in the sediment. And again, that tells you information about the transport mechanisms and the origin of these rocks. They also have like a rough texture, and so that's one of the first things that I noticed. And yesterday I was speculating whether these are sedimentary rocks or volcanic rocks, or possibly diagenetic features in some of these rocks. There are other rocks in the background, what we call float rocks. They're individual blocks, and those look a little bit more angular. Yesterday as well, in the background, Jen pointed out that, there's a feature in the background, and we were speculating whether it was the crater rim, but I actually think it might be the delta, now that we know where the rover landed. And so, yeah, a lot of diversity. And I think in some of the images, you can even see some of the dunes in the background from one of the units that's nearby. So while a lot of people might just see rocks, I see, again, like a lot of diversity that hopefully we can start exploring in the coming days. I don't know, those were my first reactions to this image. A lot.
I can bring it back up if anyone else has anything to add. I can get up the other image.
Yeah, I was most interested to hear Frances's take because she is the expert on inferring rock history from images like this. But to me, my first inclination was to pull up the first images from Curiosity and then from some of the other landers, just to kind of do a comparative, to get a comparative sense. And I think there is a lot more diversity just in the sizes and shapes of rocks visible in, admittedly, just this very first look of the very local surroundings of the rover. But compared to Gale Crater, I think it was mostly fine-grained stuff in the immediate vicinity of the landing site. That was also true for Opportunity, although Opportunity landed in a crater that was rolled into a crater because it had a different landing site, landing mechanism, so it rolled at the end and ended up in a crater filled with sand, but with a little bit of bedrock on the horizon. And maybe this is a little more comparable to like the Spirit landing site, where you had sort of a mixture of some angular clasts, but with smaller grain stuff in between. But as Frances notes, maybe some initial evidence that these rocks are not all volcanic in origin, which the ones at the Spirit site were. So that's my quick comparative take.
This one, I thought this image was also cool. You can see the kind of, whether it's the hill or a dune or the crater wall or the delta. Maybe the delta is what folks are talking about now. As Frances mentioned, in the background, you can see those rocks that are kind of, underneath the surface. You can kind of see them peeking out. You can see the rocks that are kind of scattered around. And then I always love the pictures of the rover, right? The shadow of the vehicle there on Mars. So I thought these were pretty fun.
Yeah, I really like that. I actually have a question, which is are we at a location where there would be frost or anything, or there's been discussion about ice under the soil. Is that relevant here or not?
I think probably not at this latitude, although it is higher latitude than certainly the Opportunity and Curiosity were basically equatorial. So this is a little bit, but I think, I don't know, in wintertime, I think not widespread anyway, wouldn't be expected, but.
Yeah, that's my instincts. Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
Looks pretty dry.
We're hoping that maybe it's, in the subsurface. But when we talk about ice or water in the subsurface, people think it might be a lot. As far as Perseverance, but we're hoping to find just evidence for hydrogen in itself, right? And so I think sometimes it can be misleading the way. I think sometimes talk about the use of the GPR in this particular location. At least I think that those are my instincts. Again, I don't know if James wants to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think at
at this location.
Yeah, if there were going to be ice here, it would just be like a very thin coating of frost on wintry mornings. But in the northern hemisphere where this one is, the seasons are a little bit less extreme just because how the eccentricity of the orbit lines up with the seasons. So I don't know, like the Vikings saw seasonal morning frosts, but they were both, I think, a little bit higher latitude. Certainly Viking 2 was higher latitude than this. But yeah, stable ground ice here would have to be pretty deep. Yeah.
So, Angela, I know you've worked with CRISM a bit for your research. I was wondering if you might tell us a little bit about how CRISM participated in the landing site selection, or how research like that helps out with landing site selection.
Yeah, so I remember listening into, I think, the last landing workshop, and people would present on their use of the CRISM targeted data. So for those who might be familiar, that's around like 18 or 36 meters per pixel. And then you have the multispectral data that's on the order of like hundreds of meters per pixel. And someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the multispectral data has been applied to like Midway, which is like a nearby area. And so from what I can remember and from what I've read and understand, it's a very mineralogically diverse region with kind of like primary minerals and alteration minerals. So I'm really interested in what tools I might be able to apply or how I can get involved with it. It seems very just a lot of potential history there to investigate. So hopefully that.
What do you mean by alteration minerals?
So minerals that have been in contact with water for some extended period of time. So you have like volcanic rock in contact with water, and then that can create an alteration mineral.
Awesome. Yeah, well, so why don't we go ahead and see if folks have questions or comments from yesterday. So if anyone who is on from Georgia Tech would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and take her away.
Sure. I'll take the first bite here. Ray, thanks for coming and doing panel again. I guess I'll go off of Brittany's sort of last prompt about the site selection. So obviously we landed in Jezero Crater. From what I gather, it's because it looks like it's an ancient lacustrine environment, and from the image that Dr. Glass just posted, it looks like there's some pretty obvious features related to flow of water of some kind. I'm curious about, which is exciting, but I'm curious about maybe what the other selection sites were, and if you have any insight to why maybe Jezero was chosen over the others.
I could say a few words about that, I guess, to start off. So there are always dozens of sites initially proposed for these for each of these missions, and I think the way that the landing site selection has been done for all the recent sites deserves commendation in itself. That rather than just the science team or JPL, the engineering team, picking the site that is safest or that they, with their own scientific perspectives, happen to think is best, is their preference. They hold these open community workshops that any scientist in the world who can fly to Pasadena can participate in and present at. And ultimately, the science team and then NASA at higher levels gets to make the final selection. But there's some of the best science conferences that I've been to in the past decade have been these open workshops to discuss the merits of the different landing sites. And I think, different scientists use different pieces of information to weigh their favorites. And one of the big sort of dichotomies that came up back in the Curiosity landing site selection days was, do you prioritize morphological evidence for water if ultimately you're interested in wet environments and habitable environments and searching for evidence of life, then do you look for places that have that evidence in the form of the geomorphology or in the form of the mineralogy, these alteration minerals like Angela was talking about? And I think for both Gale Crater for Curiosity and now Jezero for Perseverance, the thought was that these sites have both types of evidence in abundance. So both the geomorphologists and the spectroscopists could agree that these were sites that showed a wide array of evidence for aqueous processes in a habitable environment over a significant period of time. So I would say maybe some of the other sites that didn't rise to the top had that in slightly lesser degrees or with slightly less certainty. So there were other paleo lake sites considered. I gave a presentation at a couple of workshops on behalf of Holden Crater, which is a crater in the southern hemisphere of Mars, similar latitude, but south of the equator, that also has diverse minerals in the surroundings, has what we argued were lake sediments that could be just as interesting as the ones in Jezero, but it didn't have a delta the way Jezero does. And so there was a little bit more debate remaining open about the layered rocks that we found within Holden. Were they definitely lake deposits, or could they be some kind of sediment, some other kind of sedimentary deposit that if we get there, we would be devastated because this is really just volcanic ash in a crater lake or something like that. So I guess with Jezero, it was certainty of the geologic interpretation and the combination of clues is kind of my take on it.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fact that there's this beautiful delta in Jezero crater in itself, like automatically tells us that there definitely was liquid water there to be able to form that feature. And of course, deltas are great because they're kind of like garbage cans in that they collect everything that was transported in the fluvial system that ultimately ended up in the delta. And so not only does the delta tell us that there was running liquid water, but also sustained liquid water with the lake environment. And so we might be able to find evidence for life from that lake environment or everything else, as I mentioned, that where the fluvial system essentially passed to then ultimately get into the delta. And so so to me, at least, that's like the exciting part about Jezero. And then of course, people keep talking about these carbonates that might also be really good. There are carbonate minerals that might have formed along the shoreline of the possible Jezero crater lake, and they're also really good at preserving biosignatures. And so I think there was a lot going on, not only geomorphologically, but also mineralogically to pick the site, in particular for the mission objectives, which always, when we're trying to select sites, we always have to keep reminding what are the actual like larger goals of the mission. And for Perseverance, of course, it was to find past evidence for life. And so we need to go somewhere that sort of checks all those boxes. But as James said, we, for all these, for site selections, there are a lot of interesting places on Mars that we could visit. And it takes a long time. There are multiple meetings and a lot of discussions. And I think, like James said, to me, that's probably one of the more constructive things about Mars science is, these workshops. So yeah, I don't know. I think there are a lot of things going on for Jezero.
Hi, I have a really quick question about the stromatolites that we were talking about yesterday. We've talked about this before, but I wanted to ask a little bit more about, how do you tell if the stromatolite is formed abiotically versus biotically? And like, what are you looking for within the signatures? What type of instruments are you using? And yeah, that was my question.
So it's really difficult to determine whether a stromatolite, and again, I guess for people who weren't here yesterday, stromatolites are essentially structures that are formed by microbial mats, and then microbial mats are essentially features that form in environments where you have microbes growing and you have sediment falling, commonly from suspension, or the microbes themselves create minerals. And so the microbes then recolonize over the sediments, and so they form layers. And so this is something that we call stromatolites, or I guess microbial mats, and sometimes they can form, again, structures that are called stromatolites. And it's very complicated to distinguish features from microbial mats that are, I guess, it's really hard to tell, the textures that you would associate with microbial mats from a process that's abiotic. And it's almost impossible, I would say, from an image. This is why, as yesterday, we kept talking about sample return, because a lot of the characteristics that you would look for are really fine detail. Like I remember, being a TA for a class, and that's one of the things we asked the students. We gave them hand samples of these, and you could see how maybe the textures were how the textures of the microbes were associated with the sediments. So can you find like an up direction within the stratigraphy to say, oh, maybe the microbes were growing towards the light, right? There's like little things you can look for, but it's really complicated. And this is why we need to bring the samples back to Earth, is the short answer. Of course, you can all, with the mineralogy instruments on the rover, you might be able to connect organics, right? And I think this is why Pixel is really important, and also Sherlock, is that you might be able to see some of these physical textures, which are really complicated, again, to distinguish between abiotic and biotic processes. But again, if you have these organics associated with those textures, then that might give us more confidence that those indeed are from, possibly microbial mats or stromatolites. But I don't like using the word stromatolite because, again, that's, to me, it's a specific term used for a structure that microbial mats can produce. And so I think most likely we'll probably, if we ever find past evidence for life, they'll probably be microbial mats, not necessarily stromatolites. That was a really roundabout way to explain that. But I don't know. I don't know if James wants to add anything. I don't know if Jen's actually online, if she wants to answer that. Or I can clarify if you have a following question, since again, that was a really roundabout
No,
answer.
that was a great answer. I've been thinking more about the MoMA instrument that's going to fly on the ESA rover, and if that would have any better capabilities of being able to identify those microbial biosignatures that could be preserved, since it can ablate the regolith of the rocks and push that into a mass spec. But that was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, ultimately you need one or the other. Yeah, so like if you only find organics, right, you can form organics from the abiotic process, and the same thing with the textures. But if you find textures that look like they might have been associated with microbes, and you see the organics, I think coupled, you might have a stronger case to make. And those are the things that the team's probably going to be looking for to ultimately select samples that then we'll drill and core and then put them in in the little tubes so that we can then bring back to Earth. But I know James does a lot more work with SAM and thinking about mass spectrometers, and so I don't know if he has anything to add. Or Angela.
No, you covered it well.
I have a question about the machine learning component of the mission and how it was tested. If it was tested using primarily or exclusively like Mars images or any Earth analogs, and how the calibration process was.
Yeah, I don't know the details of that. I do know that they basically feed images, representative images, in analog images, and there was a lot of testing done out in the desert, and basically that's how you train it, and that's really the best you can do from an Earth and analog situation. So I think that was a big question, was how would the machine learning perform with the terrain relative navigation. It looks like it worked fine. So, as far as we know. That's really the best answer I can give.
I just
Similar to
posted
that question.
a link about the landing site characterization. So there's a blog from NASA and JPL just earlier this year about how they did that testing. And yeah, out in the Mojave, there's a lot of really interesting features. There's rocks and boulders, and there's bushes and stuff, and there's lots of these very Martian-looking types of features, lots of like little tables and stuff, and dunes and things. So they train it on the best sets of things that they expect to see, and then go ahead and do that. So check out that blog there in the chat.
Yeah, the good news is there are places you can go where the terrain is similar. Of course, the gravity and the density are different, right? So, but they have interesting ways of handling that. They put like counterbalance masses on and things like that to basically simulate a reduced gravity for the dynamics. And I'm sure all of that was done, but I don't know the details. I wasn't in the team that did it, but I'm sure they did a very thorough job.
Way cool. Thanks, Dr. Lightsey. Thanks, Brittany.
James, you were going to share a rover pathway. There was a question actually about that as well from Justin. I didn't know if you had that up, but if not, maybe grab that while we answer another question.
Yeah, I can do that. It kind of gets at Justin's question and Micah's question about both what's scientifically interesting and what's actually traversable. I've got a bunch of things open here, but I'll try to find the right one.
No worries. While you're grabbing that, actually, I wanted to give Frances Bryson a chance to, if she wanted to turn on her camera and unmute, because Frances actually did an internship working on Mars 2020 as a student here at Georgia Tech. So I wondered if she might just share some of the stuff that she did. I told her that we might put her on the spot. So Frances, did you want to talk about what you did? We can get it to work. Let's see.
Also, I love this. I've never been in a panel ever with another Frances, so this is great.
We believe strongly in the concept of always bring spares to the field. We always make that joke because there's always like several Bens or several Justins or something. So, but it's cool to have several Franceses. Sure, Frances, can you? Is it working now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's stable. Yeah, so I worked as a co-op actually, so I got a little bit longer than the summer internship back in 2015 and then again in 2016, back when this was Mars 2020 and in its early stages. So I did a lot on kind of like the descent stage part. So it was a lot of updating different engineering drawings to be up to the new specs, because this last flew in Curiosity and a lot of things were just carried over, but specs were updated and things like that. Sometimes we had to change dimensions and things for different tolerance specs. So not super exciting, but anything's exciting when it's going to Mars. And then the new part that is actually quite exciting, that is still part of the project, is they are including new cameras on the descent stage to look at the parachute and to watch the rover land. And so I worked somewhat on the kind of placement of those and putting together a test to make sure that when we put them on the parts of the descent stage that they wanted to look at, or actually on the back shell too, you could actually see the parachute, you could actually see the rover and things like that. So that's a little bit of what I did, and hopefully we'll get pictures back from that soon to kind of show the rover actually landing and how the parachute is working in this low atmosphere environment. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I was curious about the landing ellipse, and looking at the pictures of how small Perseverance's was compared to previous rovers. I was curious to know what you thought the most influential technology was in making that happen. Was it those cameras? Was it the machine learning? What do you think played the most influential role?
Oh, man, there's a lot of it's kind of the combination of things. So they've got a landing radar as well. So it's like a landing radar altimeter. So it's basically like rapidly telling you the distance from anything below you as well as the images. So I think it's actually like the handshake between multiple instruments that's a huge challenge. To verify the machine learning from visual algorithms with a totally different type of sensor is not an easy task. So that would be my thoughts on it, but perhaps others have thoughts as well.
It's interesting, actually. One of the biggest effects on the landing ellipse is the atmospheric entry interface knowledge, your position and velocity knowledge at atmospheric entry interface. Because once you're in the atmosphere, your ability to move is more limited. So I actually think maybe improvements. I do agree it's a complete system, right? So everything along the way helped. But improvements in trajectory knowledge, of final approach knowledge, which has really been enhanced by having several orbiters around Mars, has a lot to do with shrinking that ellipse, as well as aerodynamic systems. The parachute that Francis mentioned is really cool and very hard to test on Earth because, again, the dynamics are totally different. So, looks like everything went well.
Thanks.
James, were you able to find the path you were going to show?
Yes, I can share my screen. So there may be other slightly different versions of this, but what I found is actually from a conference abstract that was specifically looking at where along the notional traverse for Perseverance might be good places for it to drop its sample cache for then the next Mars sample return lander to be able to safely go and retrieve it. But in any case, they have this map here that shows notional traverses, because all of this will depend on exactly what the rover finds in its higher resolution images, and of course where it starts, which they had no idea at the time. If you're looking at the map on my screen, if you can see my cursor, like the landmarks I use for where the rover ended up, there's these two craters here in the middle on the eastern side of the ellipse, and the rover is kind of halfway in between those two and a little bit to the south. And so presumably the idea will be to drive westward toward the delta front, which is kind of the primary target of interest in the near term. And then I guess they thought, depending on whether you're toward the northern side of the ellipse or the southern side, you may take one of a few different paths, either around the delta, or some of these they have going up across the delta, implying that it might be traversable to even just drive right across the thing. But then over the longer term, the hope is to eventually drive out of Jezero crater entirely. And so it's kind of hard to see in the grayscale here, but the crater rim is like cutting from the top to the bottom of this image about halfway through. And then to drive west-southwest toward the area Angela mentioned, which is called Midway, which sounds kind of random, but there were actually two landing sites in this same general region in the final set considered for Perseverance, and another one was a few more kilometers to the south of this, outside of Jezero. And so this Midway ellipse was a sort of late addition to the possible landing sites for Perseverance that was midway between the prior Northeast Syrtis major site and the Jezero site. And so what they ultimately decided they hoped to do is get the best of both worlds and land in Jezero and drive outward to this midway site, which the one other map I can show is from a paper by some Perseverance team members at Caltech, Bethany Ehlman and one of her students, showing that so Jezero is interesting with its delta and the carbonates and some minerals that are present in there, but once you get outside the crater, there's a lot more diversity in terms of, well, just even the colors that you see in orbital images, and then where we do have compositional information, some of the compositions that are inferred. So that midway site, that's kind of the long-range drive target, would be in this kind of colorful area down here where there seem to be lots of different rock types, and that would be the hope to sample toward the end of the mission. So what I was saying to Brittany in the chat is this then opens up all kinds of interesting questions about, like, where do you drop the sample cache, or do you drop it in multiple places, like one inside and one outside Jezero? But then how does that, what constraints does that impose on the next mission to go retrieve the samples? And how much time do you want to spend in Jezero versus outside? So that's potentially something that we could debate here, I guess.
I'll ask a provocative question. Did you want to pick Jezero? What were the other options you might have? Was anyone crossing their fingers for a different landing site? And why might that be?
Even though I presented on behalf of another site, it was a similar site in its scientific potential, that it had access to diverse ancient rocks and also lake sediments. And so the fact that Jezero, which offers similar types of things, was ultimately chosen was really not at all problematic in my mind. I like the Jezero site, but yeah, interested to hear what Angela or Francis or anyone else.
Oh, I think in addition to Jezero, Eberswalde to me was another top pick, because it also has a beautiful deltaic deposit. And again, it's like another obvious place where, there must have been liquid water, and it had to form in a sustained water environment if it is a delta. And so, yeah, Eberswalde was probably my other top pick. How about you, Angela? Did you have any top picks for this?
Yeah, I guess at the beginning of the workshop, I was kind of indifferent, but then the more I learned about Jezero, the people who presented on it, I guess they did a good job of like convincing me that it's where you should go.
More questions from our Georgia Tech folks?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question to that. It might be a long question, but I'll try to shorten it. And this is about like future landing sites for future missions. I mean, I know we know that some of these minerals have been altered by liquid water, but my question is, we don't fully know what the environmental conditions were like on Mars in the past. So my question for you guys is, in the future, to select landing sites with like a higher potential for biomarker preservation, how do you think that we can I don't know, I just feel like there's this gap between selecting landing sites because we don't know what those environmental conditions were like. So if we looked on Earth and studied similar environments, then we could learn more about how biomarkers could have been altered or preserved. And I didn't know what your guys' thoughts. Sorry, that was a long spiel, but yeah.
Well, my provocative answer to a slightly different question than what Brittany asked, but that gets at Taylor's question here is, if I were in charge of the Mars program, personally, I would have preferred to do smaller rovers to a larger number of sites on Mars before choosing the one to invest the many billions of dollars in sample return in. Now, sample return is going to be hugely transformative, and we talked about this scientifically yesterday, and I'm not mad about getting samples back from Mars. That'll be super cool. But as Taylor's saying, there's a diversity of options at Mars, and from our experience in terrestrial environments, you could argue for a number of different ones being potentially compelling. And Taylor asked last Friday at Eileen Yink's talk about chloride deposits, and there's thousands of places across the surface of Mars now where we've detected chloride salt deposits in places maybe kind of geologically like Jezero, where water ponded and what was left behind was chlorides in particular, and they have their own advantages in terms of preserving biosignatures and so forth. But we don't really know that much about how these chloride salt flats got to be where they are on Mars, or exactly how good they would be for preservation. What percentage chloride are these things, these rocks that we're detecting from orbit and saying they have some amount of chlorides in them? There's a lot of unknowns. So I think what I kind of wish we'd done before sample return, but I hope we'll still do even now that we're kind of committed to sample return at Jezero, is indeed going and investigating some of these other environments that look enticing from orbit, but that we still know pretty little about to, in my mind, make the decision that yes, this is the one sample we'd like back from Mars. But maybe others feel the opposite way and want to say, no, wait, sample return is overdue, which Chris Carr was kind of arguing that yesterday, that sample return, we've been waiting 20 years to finally get sample return. And I don't know, there's a range of opinions.
Why not both? I don't know. Of course, there are other countries as well who are going to be sending rovers to Mars and to different locations. And so I think, in addition to Perseverance, we're going to be able to learn about other, Mars locations. And, some of those rovers will even have similar instruments. And so I think ultimately we'll be able to do a little bit of both.
Well, we're nearly at the top of the hour. If there aren't any other burning questions, I had kind of a fun one, which was, does anyone have a favorite meme they saw yesterday from the landing? I was surprised that the first picture was from Mars, and then someone was like the next picture you saw, Bernie Sanders was sitting right there. So I wondered if anyone had a favorite meme from yesterday's social media response.
I did enjoy also the version where they, not to make this political, but somebody put in the picture of Ted Cruz escaping the frigid Texas to go, in real life to Cancun, but somebody put him on Jezero Crater, which I'm not sure would be more pleasant than Texas, but thought that was funny.
I think the first Twitter message I saw after they landed was, are they going to investigate the face on Mars?
Always. There's a question that gets asked. What is this one of, Francis?
Oh, it's like a pain from The Lion King. And they talk about what's beyond the shadow place. And, the last pane says, those are the EDL pics. We can never see them. Because there was a lot of, Twitter talk and, them, texting back and forth with people on the team being like, come on, you got to share the EDL videos and pics. Because we know they're there, and, they keep teasing on Twitter that they're amazing and that we need to, pay attention to all the press conferences. And so I thought that was funny. Because that's how I felt. It's just like, oh, we're never going to see these EDL pics that keep promising that are amazing. But I did laugh at the Ted Cruz one. and the burning. Those are pretty good. A lot of great ones. And I think there was another one that said Venus is next, and I thought that was on point. Had a little sign, you know, Venus is next. But
I saw also the SpaceX where the SpaceX astronaut in the, oh my gosh, in the car. Anyway, that was pretty funny. I laughed at that. I was like, nicely done. There was some silliness going on, so pretty good. Alrighty, folks. Well, if there's nothing further, let's go ahead and we'll thank our panelists again. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning and for taking questions and sharing some of the excitement. Thanks to everybody who participated in the panel, in the events over the course of the week. I really wanted to highlight the hard work by Christina and Chase and Elizabeth and the folks with Exploragens, Rebecca, and many others who put on events and put out materials. And so thanks everyone for your amazing work this week. It was pretty exciting to be able to, you know, share it all together. It's hard to feel connected when we're all in virtual land, but I think it was quite a lot of fun to be able to at least kind of share the experience with everyone. So we had 195 people join over the course of yesterday's launch festivities, which is pretty good. Pretty excited about that. That's a great response. And obviously there's excitement about the work. So thanks again, Francis, Glenn, James, and Angela for your awesome words this morning. And take care, everyone. Have a fantastic weekend and make sure to watch the press conferences. We'll talk to you guys all later. Bye.